She was assaulted and abandoned on her wedding day by her husband, but a mysterious millionaire appeared, and what he did for her shocked even the most devout believers. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us by following. Sunday dawned with that sticky heat that clung to the skin like an unfulfilled promise. Clara Remy adjusted her veil for the last time in front of the fogged-up mirror in the small room at the back of the Rising Sun Church, her hands shaking so much that she could barely hold the bouquet of white roses. Outside, she could hear the low murmur of the congregation settling into the wooden benches that creaked under the weight of expectations and whispered secrets. She was 28 years old and had waited so long for this moment. A literature teacher at the municipal school, she had always been seen as a studious, reserved girl who read too much and spoke too little. Mario Fontes seemed like the right choice, a prosperous businessman, a regular churchgoer, approved by her family, and respected in the small stone town in the valley. It was a marriage that made sense to everyone except perhaps to Clara's heart, which whispered doubts she preferred not to hear. The door opened and Nara, the sacristan, appeared, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's time, my daughter. Your fiancé is already at the altar." Clara nodded, took a deep breath and walked through the aisles of the church she had known since she was little, where she had made her first communion, her confirmation, where she prayed every week, asking for a life that made sense. The organ began to play the wedding march, and Clara emerged into the main nave feeling the weight of 100 eyes upon her. The stained glass windows filtered the morning light, creating a mosaic of colors on her simple but elegant dress, which she had embroidered herself for months. Her parents, seated in the front row, smiled with restrained pride. Everything seemed perfect, like a photograph she would treasure forever. But when her eyes fell on Mario standing before the altar, something was wrong. He wasn't smiling. His hands were clenched into fists, his face drawn into an expression she had never seen before. Father José, an elderly man who had baptized her, looked nervously between her and the groom, as if he knew something everyone else didn't. Clara kept walking, each step echoing in the growing silence of the church. The murmur of people had ceased completely, replaced by a tension she could feel in the air, thick as the moisture seeping through the ancient windows. When she reached the altar, she reached out to Mario, but he pulled away. "No." The word came, out of his mouth like a shot. "I will not marry an impure woman." Clara's world came crashing down in that instant. 100 voices rose in shocked whispers, chairs creaked as people turned to get a better look at the spectacle unfolding. She felt the blood drain from her face, her legs weakening. "Mario, what are you talking about?" His voice came out weak, almost inaudible. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Clara. Did you think I wouldn't find out, that you'd be able to fool me?" He took a step toward her, his eyes bloodshot with an anger that seemed to come from a very dark place. "Everyone here needs to know who you really are." Clara looked around desperately, searching for a friendly face, someone who could understand that there was a terrible mistake going on. But she saw only curious eyes, some indignant, others amused by the drama that was unfolding. Not even her own parents stood up to defend her. "I didn't do anything, Mario. You're confusing me with—" But she couldn't finish her sentence. Mario raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face. The crack echoed through the entire church like thunder. Clara staggered, tasting blood in her mouth, her veil slipping from her head. "Liar." He snatched the bouquet from her hands and threw it to the ground, trampling the white roses until they were a pulp of broken petals and stems. "You don't even deserve those flowers." Father José finally tried to intervene, but his voice was hesitant. "My son, perhaps it would be better if we spoke in private." "No, Father, everyone here needs to know. This woman betrayed me. She dishonored me. And she still had the nerve to come here, dressed in white, pretending to be pure." Mario looked at the congregation as if he were a prosecutor presenting evidence. "We have witnesses, photographs. She is not who you think she is." Clara felt as if she were drowning in a nightmare. Words wouldn't come out. Her thoughts were jumbled. What witnesses? What photographs? What was he talking about? But the truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the spectacle, the public humiliation, the complete destruction of a reputation built over a lifetime. Clara ran. She ran like she had never run. Before in her life, her wedding dress dragging along the dirt of the valley's cobblestone streets, her torn veil fluttering behind her like a flag of surrender. The laughter and spiteful comments of the guests still echoed in her ears, mixed with the sound of her uncontrolled sobs. She didn't stop even when her father shouted her name, nor when Donna Aparecida, her childhood neighbor, tried to grab her by the arm. The fate of her feet had always been known, the defunct rural school on the edge of town where she had taught for 5 years before being transferred to the municipal school. It was a brick building with clay roof tiles, surrounded by a dirt yard where children played among the centuries-old mango trees. Now it had been empty for 2 years, abandoned, just as she felt. He pushed open the rusty gate and entered what had once been his sanctuary. The classroom still had desks stacked in one corner, the cracked blackboard where he had written so many poems by Cecilia Mireles and Carlos Drummond de Andrade. On the floor, dry leaves piled up along with forgotten pieces of chalk and broken dreams. Clara sank to the floor of the room where she usually taught literature, leaning her back against the cold wall. Her white dress, now stained with dirt and tears, spread around her like a puddle of frustration. For the first time since she had run out of the church, she allowed herself to really cry. A deep, heartbreaking cry that came from a place she hadn't even known existed inside her. Hours passed without her noticing. The sun moved through the broken window, creating different shadows on the peeling wall. When she finally stopped crying, Clara realized she had nowhere to go. She couldn't go home. How would she explain to her parents what had happened? How would she convince someone she was innocent when she didn't even understand what she was being accused of? On Monday, the whole town was buzzing with the story. Clara found out about it because Donna Judita, the blind healer who lived in the house next to the school, brought her a plate of food and the bad news. "Girl, people's tongues are wagging like snakes in the Torero. They say you were seen with a man in San Juan del Rey, that he had photographs, that you had a love correspondence." The old woman shook her head, worried. "That's ugly, very ugly." Clara took the food with trembling hands. "Mrs. Judith, do you really believe I would do something like that?" The woman was silent for a long moment, her white eyes focused on a random point in space. "Girl, I've lived long enough to know that truth and lies sometimes go hand in hand. What I do know is that you have a good heart. But a good heart doesn't protect anyone from the evil of others." For the next few days, Clara remained hidden in the abandoned school, living off the leftovers that Donna Judith would bring her in secret, and the water she collected from the rain in old buckets. She didn't have the courage to go out, to face the stares, the whispers, the pointing fingers. In the morning, she would hear the children passing by on their way to the municipal school, their cheerful voices contrasting with the deathly silence that had settled over her life. It was one of those mornings, when she was trying to clean one of the rooms to make it more habitable, that she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. It had a powerful engine, unlike the old cars that drove around the city. Clara ran to the window and peered through the nailed boards. A tall, elegant man was getting out of a black BMW, wearing a dark suit despite the heat. He had grey hair, at the temples, an aristocratic bearing, and something in the way he moved that suggested power and money. He walked across the schoolyard with a steady step, but his eyes revealed something different, a deep nostalgia, as if he were visiting a beloved grave. Clara hid behind the classroom door and watched as he stopped in front of the largest tree in the yard, an ancient mango tree whose branches stretched almost across the entire grounds. The man rested his hand on the trunk and remained there for long minutes, so still that Clara thought he had fallen asleep standing up. When he finally moved, it was to take a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket. It looked like an old letter, yellowed with time. He read it in silence, and Clara saw a tear run down his face. "I'm back, Miguel," he whispered to the tree, and his voice held such deep pain that Clara felt her own heart clench. "It took me a while, but I'm back." At that moment, a gust of wind made the door creak, and the man turned toward the noise. His eyes met Clara's through the crack, and for a moment neither of them moved. His eyes were dark, intense, and they seemed to carry the weight of many untold stories. Clara saw something in them that she recognized immediately, the same desolate loneliness that consumed her, the same sense of having been cast out of the world of others. Leonardo Giordano was not a man easily frightened. At 47, he had faced hostile boards of directors, negotiated with corrupt politicians, and survived 2 kidnapping attempts in Mexico. But when he saw those haunted eyes peering through the crack in the door, he felt something he had not experienced in a long time, genuine compassion for another human being. "You don't have to hide," he said, keeping his voice low and gentle. "I won't hurt you." Clara hesitated for a moment, then slowly pushed open the door. She appeared wearing a simple, worn dress, her hair tied in a messy bun, her bare feet covered in dirt. Yet there was a natural dignity in her posture that caught Leo's attention immediately. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice hoarse from crying so much over the past few days. "I didn't know anyone was coming here." "Are you a teacher?" He pointed to the books stacked in the corner of the room, many of them classic Brazilian literature. "Was." The word came out thick with bitterness. "Now I'm just the woman who was rejected at the altar." Leo recognized in her voice the same tone she used when she spoke of her own past. "Ah," he said simply, "you're Clara Remy." She stiffened, bracing herself for another onslaught of judgment and condemnation. "And you are?" Leonardo Giordano. "Leo." He put the letter in his pocket and walked a few steps toward her. "I studied here when I was a child before I had to leave." There was something in the way he said having to go that made Clara understand that his story wasn't simple either. "Did you come back to visit?" "I'm back to stay. I'm going to restore this school." Leo looked around, assessing the state of the building. "Turn it into a cultural center. The city needs a place where people can learn, think, create, a safe place." Clara almost laughed, but the sound that came out was more of a groan of despair. "A safe place? Mr. Leonardo, you don't know the Valley Stone. There is no safe place here for those who don't fit into what is expected." "I know this city better than you think." Leo's voice grew harder. "I know exactly how it treats people who are different. That's why I need to do something." They were silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara observed that elegant man and tried to understand what he was doing there, talking to her as if she were a normal person, not the outcast that the whole city considered her. "Why don't you ask if it's true?" she said finally. "If I really cheated on my fiancé?" Leo looked at her directly. "Because I don't care if you cheated or not. What matters is whether you're okay, whether you have somewhere to sleep, something to eat. What matters is that a woman was publicly humiliated and is now living in an abandoned school as if she were a criminal." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes again. It had been days since anyone had spoken to her like a human being. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I swear to God I didn't do anything." "I believe in you." 3 simple words. That had more effect than all the sermons Clara had ever heard in her life. She sank down on one of the old desks and cried, not the desperate crying of the first days, but a cry of relief, as if part of the weight she had been carrying had been shared with someone else. Leo approached slowly and sat down at a nearby desk. "Do you want to tell me what really happened?" And Clara told him. She talked about the engagement arranged by her parents, about the pressure from the church to get married soon, about the night before the wedding when Mario showed up at her house drunk, saying he had the right to be with her since he would be hers the next day. She talked about how she tried to resist, how he forced her, how the next day he accused her of cheating in front of everyone. He said he had witnesses, photographs, Clara continued, her voice shaking. But I never understood what he was talking about. I'd never dated another man, never had a relationship before him. I was a virgin until... She couldn't finish the sentence. Leo felt a cold anger growing in his chest. "Where are your parents in all of this?" "They believed him. They said a decent woman wouldn't get into a situation like that unless she gave a reason." Clara wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "My mother said I brought shame to the family." "What about the police?" Police? Clara almost laughed. Mr. Leonardo, the police chief is Mario's brother-in-law. The judge goes to the same church. The priest who was going to marry us has known my family since I was born and still didn't defend me. Who am I going to complain to? Leo remained silent, absorbing the story. He was well acquainted with the local power network, the collusion between family, church, and authorities. He had been a victim of it himself 20 years ago. The difference was that now he had the resources to do something about. "Joyce Clara," he said, and there was a new determination in his voice. "You're not going to stay here living like a fugitive. I'm going to hire you to help me with the school project. You'll have a salary, a house, dignity, and we're going to find out who set this up against you." She stared at him as if he had just offered her the moon. Why? Why would you do that for a stranger? Leo put the letter back in his pocket and looked out the broken window at the mango tree in the yard. Because sometimes the only way to heal our own wounds is to help heal someone else's. The house that Leo rented for Clara was on a quiet street on the stone outskirts of the valley, far enough from the center to avoid prying eyes, but close enough to the school that she could walk there every day. It was simple but dignified. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a tidy kitchen, and a backyard where jasmine plants grew and perfumed the nights. It took Clara 3 days to accept the proposal, not because of Leo's distrust, but because part of her still believed that she deserved the punishment she was receiving. 28 years of being taught that a decent woman is not a reason for gossip had left deep marks on her soul. "I don't know if I should take it," she said on her first morning of work, when Leo showed up with architectural plans under his arm and a determined expression on his face. "People are going to say, sup." "People are already talking," he interrupted, spreading papers out on a makeshift table made of boards and sawhorses. "The question is, are you going to let them decide your life, or are you going to decide for yourself?" Clara looked at the drawings of the future renovated school. Leo had hired architects from Belo Horizonte, and the project was ambitious. A large library, an auditorium for presentations, art studios, and a computer lab. A dream materialized on paper. "It's going to be beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the drawing of the library. "The kids are going to love it. It's not just for children. I want to offer literacy courses for adults, literature workshops, community theater." Leo watched her as she studied the projects. "I need someone who understands education, who knows the community, someone who knows what people's real needs are." "Why did you choose to come back here of all places?" Clara looked up at him. "A man like you could do this project anywhere in the country." Leo was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the mango tree in the courtyard. "I was 17 when I left here. I was in my last year of high school, and I wanted to study engineering." His voice lowered as if he were telling a long-kept secret. "There was a seminarian in town, Miguel Santos, 3 years older than me. He taught me Latin after school." Clara realized that she was about to hear something very intimate, something that would explain the deep sadness she had seen in Leo's eyes since their first meeting. "We fell in love," Leo continued, still looking out the window. "It was the purest, most intense thing I've ever felt in my life. There was no evil, there was no perversion. It was just love. The kind of love you read about in poems and think you'll never feel." "What happened?" "Someone saw us kissing here at school, one afternoon after classes. The next day, my mother was waiting for me at home with my suitcase, packed and a ticket to São Paulo. She said that I had brought shame to the family, that it was better for me to disappear before the whole city found out that they had raised a deviant." Clara felt a tightness in her chest. "And Miguel? They sent him to a seminary in another city. I never got to talk to him again." Leo finally turned to Clara, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I found out later that he died in a car accident, 3 years later, alone on a remote road driving in the middle of the night. I always wondered if it really was an accident." The silence that followed was filled with mutual understanding. Clara approached Leo and, on impulse, took his hand. It was the first time she had touched a man without fear since that terrible night with Mario. "That's why you want to build this school," she said softly, "so other people won't have to run away like you did." and so that other women are not, destroyed as they tried to do to you. They held hands for a moment, two survivors recognizing their similar wounds. Clara felt something strange stirring in her chest, not passion, not yet, but a deep connection to this man who had also been rejected by the very place where he was born. "I'll help you," she said finally, "not just with school, with everything." Over. The next few days, Clara and Leo worked side by side, planning every detail of the renovation. She suggested changes based on her experience as a teacher, lower windows so the little children could see the playground, shelves at different heights, in the library, large spaces for group activities. Leo listened to each suggestion with genuine attention, jotting everything down in a leather notebook he always carried in his pocket. In the afternoons, when work was over, they would sit in the courtyard and talk. Clara discovered that Leo had built a business empire in São Paulo, but had never married, never had children, never allowed anyone to truly get close to him. He discovered that she wrote poetry in her spare time, that she dreamed of publishing a book, that she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night reciting verses by Adelia Prado. "Could you recite one for me?" he asked one such afternoon, as the sun set behind the mountains and the air was perfumed with the scent of jasmine from Clara's garden. She hesitated, blushed, but then closed her eyes and recited from memory a poem she had written years before. "There was a woman inside me I didn't know, who slept while I lived the life I was given, until the day came when life broke me and she woke up, and I found that she was the one who should have lived all along." When Clara opened her eyes, she saw Leo watching her with an intensity that made her blush even more. At that moment, they both knew that something had changed between them, something that went far beyond a professional partnership or a friendship based on shared pain. Their first kiss happened on a night of torrential rain, when Clara and Leo were stuck at school waiting for the storm to pass. They were organizing the books donated to the future library, Clara reading the titles aloud, while Leo catalogued them in a notebook. Suddenly, she stopped in mid-sentence when she found a copy of 100 Years of Solitude, with a dedication on the first page. "To Miguel, who taught me that true love resists all exiles. With love, Leonardo," Clara read in a low voice, feeling that she had discovered something very intimate. Leo looked up from his notebook and saw the book in his hands. For a moment, his face was contorted with pain, but then it softened into an expression of wistful acceptance. "I bought it to give him for Christmas," he explained, walking over to Clara. "I never had the courage to give it to him. I kept it all these years as if I would find it on some street corner one day." Clara held the book to her chest, moved by the trust Leo had placed in her by sharing that memory. He would have liked it. Garcia Marquez talks so much about impossible love. Like ours? The question left Leo's mouth before he could censor it. Clara stared at him, surprised by his boldness, but also by the raw sincerity in his voice. "We don't have an impossible love," she whispered. "We don't even have a love, don't we?" Leo moved closer until she could feel the heat of his body, the scent of his cologne mixed with the scent of rain coming through the windows. "So what do you call this thing that happens when we're together? This feeling that the world makes sense for the first time in years?" Clara didn't know how to answer. In the last few weeks, she had found herself looking forward to her daily meetings with Leo, to the way he listened to her when she spoke, to the way his eyes lit up when she made an intelligent suggestion about the project. She had gotten used to sleeping with his voice echoing in her head, with the conversations they had during the afternoons, extending into dreams, into the early hours of the morning. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Afraid that it's just gratitude. Afraid that you'll feel sorry for me. Afraid that I'm confusing affection with love. And I'm afraid I'm betraying Miguel's memory," Leo replied, placing his hand on Clara's face with a gentleness that made her close her eyes. "Afraid I'm too old for you. Afraid I'll ruin the only good thing that's happened in my life in 20 years. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if they were both testing uncharted waters. But when Clara responded, tangling her fingers in Leo's hair, something snapped between them. 20 years of his loneliness, weeks of her humiliation, all dissolved in that moment of genuine connection. When they broke apart, Clara was crying, not from sadness, but from relief. "I thought I would never feel this way again," she whispered. "After what happened with Mario, I thought I was broken inside." "You're not broken. You're wounded, and wounds heal when treated with care." They spent the night talking, hugging on the school floor, listening to the rain hitting the tin roof. Clara told him about her childhood dreams, about how she wanted to be a writer, but was convinced by her family to be a teacher because it was safer for a woman. Leo talked about his early years in São Paulo, how he built his company working 16 hours a day so he wouldn't have time to miss someone, and how he never let anyone get close to him because he was afraid of suffering again. "Do you think it's a sin?" Clara asked as the first ray of sunlight came through the window. "What are we feeling?" "If so, then God created a very cruel world," Leo replied, kissing her forehead. "Because this is the purest thing I've ever felt in my life." Over the next few weeks, their relationship blossomed in secret. Leo visited her every night, always with the excuse of discussing details of the project. They ate dinner together, read poetry aloud, and made love with a tenderness that healed old wounds. Clara discovered that the body could be a source of pleasure and not just pain, that there was a difference between being taken by force and surrendering oneself willingly. But the Valley Stone was too small for big secrets. Soon the whispers, the malicious looks, the venomous comments began. "The shameless girl has now found a rich man to bankroll her." "That's just how a lost woman is. She goes from man to man." "Poor Leonardo. He doesn't know who he's messing with." Clara felt the weight of stares wherever she went, at the bakery, at the pharmacy, on the street. Some women would even cross to the other side when they saw her coming. Others made a point of talking loudly about her when she passed by. "I'm messing with your life," she told Leo one night, after a particularly rough day when someone had thrown trash in her yard. "People are talking bad about you because of me." "Let them talk," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "I didn't come back here to please anyone. I came back to make peace with myself, and I met you along the way." But Clara knew it wasn't that simple. She saw how some suppliers treated Leo with suspicion now, how certain people in the city who had previously greeted him with respect now only nodded coldly. Their relationship was costing them both dearly. It was then that she discovered something that would change everything. She was pregnant. The positive test trembled in her hands one morning in October, while Leo was in Belo Horizonte sorting out bureaucratic issues for the project. Clara sat on the bathroom floor and cried. She didn't know whether from joy or despair. The child could be Leo's, the fruit of the love they had discovered together, or it could be Mario's, the result of the violence he had committed on the eve of their wedding. There was no way of knowing, no way of being certain, and this uncertainty threatened to destroy the fragile happiness that she and Leo had built with such care. Clara kept the secret of her pregnancy for a whole week, watching Leo during dinner, studying his face as he talked about the future they planned together. How could she tell him that she might be carrying another man's child? How could she explain that the child might be the result of violence and not love? The decision to tell came one night when Leo arrived home more excited than usual, carrying a bottle of wine and a big smile on his face. "I have a surprise," he announced, pouring 2 glasses. "I've got final approval from the city. The school will open in March and—" He paused dramatically, his eyes shining. "I want you to be the principal. Officially." Clara looked at the glass of wine in her hands and felt her stomach churn. "Leo, I need to tell you something." Something in the tone of her voice made his smile disappear. He sat down beside her on the couch, suddenly serious and attentive. "I'm pregnant." The words came out in a whisper, but they echoed in the small room like a scream. Leo stood still for a moment, processing the information. Then slowly a smile began to form on his lips. "Clara, this is wonderful. We're going to have a child." "Leo, no." Clara stood up abruptly, starting to pace the room. "You don't understand. I don't know whose child it is." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara saw the exact moment reality hit Leo, how his eyes widened, how his shoulders hunched, how his hands shook before he clenched his fists. "Mario," he said, and the name came out like a curse. The night before the wedding, he showed up at my house drunk, saying he had the right, that I was going to be his the next day anyway. Clara stopped walking and turned to Leo, tears streaming down her face. I tried to resist, but he was stronger. Then he left, saying that I liked it, that deep down that was what I wanted. Leo stood up slowly, like a man much older than his 47 years. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if I didn't talk about it, I could pretend it never happened. Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. And because I was afraid you would see me differently. Do you think I care? Leo's voice was rough with emotion. Do you think the way I feel about you would change because of some violence you suffered? But the child is not to blame for how he was conceived. And I already love this child because he is yours. Leo approached Clara and held her hands. It doesn't matter who the biological father is. If you want to have this baby, I will raise him as if he were my own blood. Clara collapsed into his arms, crying all the tears she had held back during that terrible week. I want to have it. Even without knowing it, I want to have it. Then let's have it. Together. But Clara's pregnancy didn't stay a secret for long. In small towns, pregnant women are noticed quickly, especially when they are the center of all the local gossip. By November, when her belly began to show, the whispers turned into open accusations. It was Donna Conceição, the pharmacist's wife, who had the courage to confront her directly. Clara was buying prenatal vitamins when the woman approached with a disgusted expression on her face. What kind of nerve is this, girl? First you cheat on your fiancé, then you get pregnant by your lover, and you still have the nerve to show up here as if nothing had happened. You don't know what you're talking about, Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't know. The whole city knows that you've been getting cozy with this Leonardo guy, and now you're pregnant? Oh, please, shameless women are like that. There are no limits. Other people in the pharmacy began to pay attention to the discussion. Clara felt their gazes like knives cutting her skin. I don't need to explain my life to anyone. Yes, you do. You have brought shame to our city. First with that ridiculous scene in the church, now with this pregnancy. What example are you setting for our daughters? Clara left the pharmacy without buying the vitamins, her cheeks burning with humiliation. On the street, other people looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and condemnation. Some turned their heads away as she passed, others whispered, pointing at her belly. Things got worse when someone started spreading anonymous letters around town, letters that detailed supposed intimate encounters between Clara and several different men describing imaginary orgies and behaviors that existed only in the sick mind of the writer. The letters were left under doors, nailed to posts and scattered across church pews. It's an organized campaign, Leo said one night, after collecting several of the letters that had been thrown into Clara's backyard. Someone wants to destroy you completely. Or destroy us both, Clara replied, a protective hand over her growing belly. Leo, maybe it's better if I leave. Go to another city. Have the baby far away from here. No, the answer came firm and immediate. We won't give them the satisfaction of seeing us run away, and besides, he held up one of the anonymous letters, pointing to the handwriting. I recognize this handwriting. Clara examined the paper more closely. The writing was feminine, neat with elaborate loops in the capital letters. Do you know who this is? Suspicious. And if I'm right, this person has a lot more secrets to hide than we do. Leo folded the letter carefully. It's time we started investigating who really set up this whole farce against you. That night, Clara dreamed of a baby who had Leo's eyes but Mario's cruel smile. She woke up in a cold sweat, her hand on her belly, whispering a prayer that the child would be the fruit of love and not hate. Because regardless of who the biological father was, she already knew that she would love that baby with all her soul. The question was whether the stone city in the valley would allow her to raise him in peace. The discovery came by chance, one rainy afternoon in December, when Leo was supervising the renovation of the school's basement. The workers had found a false wall behind an old bookcase, and when they knocked it down, they revealed a small hidden compartment. Inside it was a dusty wooden trunk that looked like it had been forgotten there for decades. Leo asked to be left alone and opened the trunk with trembling hands. What he found made his heart stop. Dozens of letters that he himself had written to Miguel 20 years ago, but had never had the courage to deliver. Naive and sincere teenage love letters that detailed every secret meeting, every conversation, every stolen moment they had shared. But there was more. At the bottom of the trunk was a diary in Miguel's handwriting. Leo opened it to a random page and read, September 15th, 1985. Leo brought me flowers today. Jasmine he picked in his backyard. He said they smelled like my hair after a shower. I should feel ashamed, but all I feel is happiness. May God forgive me, but I think I prefer this sin to a lifetime of empty virtue. Leo had to stop reading, tears blurring his vision. Miguel had saved his letters, had written about him, had felt the same intensity he felt. It wasn't his imagination. The love had been real and reciprocated. He continued reading and discovered things that shocked him. Miguel had been called several times by Father José for conversations about inappropriate behavior. He had been pressured by local church leaders to report Leo to confess intimate details of their relationship. When he refused, the threats began. October 3rd, 1985. Father Antonio told me today that if I didn't cut ties with Leo, he would tell my family and his everything. He said I was an evil influence, that I was corrupting. A pure young man. How can I explain that Leo is the only pure thing in my life? How can I make them understand that what we feel is not dirty or wrong? October 10th, 1985. They transferred Leo to São Paulo. His mother showed up at my house, screaming, calling me a demon, saying I had seduced her innocent son. I tried to explain that I was the one who fell in love first, but she wouldn't listen. Leo left without being able to say goodbye. I feel like they ripped out half of my soul. The last entries in the diary were even more disturbing. Miguel had been sent to a seminary in Ouro Preto, but he continued to be pressured to cure himself of his illness. He had been subjected to sessions with a religious psychologist, forced to fast for long periods of time, and forced to sleep on the cold floor as penance. December 15th, 1987. I can't take it anymore. They want to break my soul, destroy any trace of the love I felt for Leo. But I refuse to call the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced a sin. If I have to choose between a God who condemns love and the emptiness they want to put in my heart, I choose to keep loving, even if it's just in my memory. The last entry was dated 2 days before Miguel's death. I'm leaving this prison they call the House of God. If I can't experience love, at least I'll die remembering it. Leo, if you ever read this, know that you were my only true happiness. Don't blame yourself for anything. They separated us, but they couldn't erase what we lived. Leo closed the diary and cried like he hadn't cried since he was 17. Miguel hadn't died in an accident. He had taken his own life, broken by the cruelty of people who turned love into sin. And for all those years, Leo had carried a guilt. That wasn't his. When Clara arrived at school a few hours later, she found Leo sitting on the basement floor, surrounded by letters, and his eyes red from crying. She walked slowly down the stairs, one hand resting on her belly, which was beginning to visibly grow. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Leo told her everything, showing her the letters and reading excerpts from Miguel's diary. Clara listened in silence, her heart breaking both for his pain and for the tragedy of the young seminarian who had chosen death over suffering. "They killed him," Leo said finally, his voice hoarse. "It wasn't their own hands that drove the car into the tree, but they were the ones who brought him to that point, the same people who are now trying to destroy you." Clara picked up one of the letters and immediately recognized the handwriting, the same as the anonymous letters that had been scattered around town in recent weeks. "Leo, look at this." He examined the letter and his expression hardened. "Father José, he read my letters to Miguel, kept them all these years, and now he's using the same handwriting to write lies about you. But why? What does he gain from it?" "Power, control, the same thing I've always wanted." Leo stood up, new determination shining in his eyes. "Clara, we're going to expose all of this. We're going to tell the truth about what happened to Miguel, about the fake letters, about how they use religion to destroy people. Leo, think carefully. If we do this, the war will be total. They won't rest until they completely destroy us. Then, let them come. He held Clara's hands tightly. I couldn't save Miguel, but I can save you. I can save our son, and I can stop them from doing this to anyone else. That night, Clara woke several times with mild contractions. They weren't labor. Contractions, the baby wouldn't be born for months, but the stress of the recent events was taking its toll. She got up slowly, walked to the window and looked out at the empty stone streets of the valley. Somewhere out there, people who called themselves Christians were plotting your destruction. People who went to church every Sunday, who prayed. The Rosary, who considered themselves the guardians of morality, were willing to lie, blackmail and destroy lives to maintain their power. But Clara no longer felt fear. She felt anger. A clean, just anger that burned in her chest like a purifying flame. They had killed Miguel with their cruelty. They had destroyed Leo's youth. They had tried to break her too. But now it was time to retaliate. It was time to show the stone of the valley that some people were not born to be silent victims. The idea came to Clara one sleepless January morning, when she got up to drink water and saw the full moon illuminating the church in the distance. If her enemies used lies disguised as morality, she would use truth disguised as fiction. She began writing that very night, anonymous letters that told her story through metaphors and symbols, leaving them on the church pews as if they were confessions of a repentant sinner. The first letter was about a young teacher who had been deceived by a cruel man who raped her on the eve of their wedding and then accused her of treason to hide his own crime. Clara wrote it as if it were a parable, using biblical language and religious references that the townspeople would understand. There was a woman who guarded her purity like a treasure, hoping to give it to the husband chosen by God. But the man who should have protected her was the one who raped her, and then lifted stones to stone her, shouting that she was impure, just as they did with the adulterous woman, only this time the one who should have been stoned was the one holding the stones. Clara left the letter on the front pew of the church one Sunday morning, arriving early before the first Mass. When she returned that afternoon to see if anyone had found it, she noticed a small group of women talking in whispers near the altar. One of them was holding the letter, reading it quietly to the others. The second letter was bolder. It told of a young seminarian who had been persecuted for loving someone of the same sex, forced to commit suicide by men who claimed to be representatives of God. Clara was careful not to give specific details, but anyone who knew Miguel Santos's story would recognize the references. There was a young servant of the Lord who loved with purity, but his love was not accepted by the Pharisees of his day. They tortured him with fasting and penance, calling what God had placed in his heart a demon. And when they could not break his soul, they watched in silence as he preferred death to life without love. Just like Judas, who also hanged himself but for having betrayed Christ, this young man died for refusing to betray love. The third letter caused quite a stir. It spoke of false letters written by members of the church itself to destroy an innocent woman, comparing them to the false witnesses who condemned Christ. Claire was careful to mention details that only the person who had written the slanderous anonymous letters would know. Specific phrases, peculiar expressions, repeated grammatical errors. The scribes and Pharisees brought false scriptures to accuse the innocent, using the sacred handwriting itself to spread lies. But just as the tablets of Moses were broken when the people worshipped the golden calf, so these false scriptures will turn against those who created them, because God cannot be mocked. The effect was immediate. People began to talk about the mysterious letters that appeared in the church, debating whether they were really confessions from a sinner or disguised denunciations. Some older women who had known Miguel Santos began to make connections. Others remembered strange details about Clara's marriage that they had not questioned at the time. Donna Judith, the blind healer, was one of the first to understand what was happening. She sought out Clara one afternoon, appearing at her house with a solemn expression on her face marked by age. Girl, I was the one who washed Miguel's body when he died, she said, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch. I saw the marks on his wrists where he had cut himself before driving. I saw the note the police hid from his family, where he asked for forgiveness for not being able to live in a prison disguised as a vocation. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. Did you keep the note? I kept it. For 20 years, waiting. For the day when someone would have the courage to tell the truth. Donna Judite took a yellowed piece of paper out of her bag, folded carefully. Miguel was my godson. I knew about his love for Leonardo. I knew how they met here at school after classes. I didn't see any evil in it, just two young hearts discovering each other. Clara read the note with tears in her eyes. It was short, written in shaky handwriting. I can no longer pretend to love God when I hate the life he has given me. I can no longer pray when the only prayers that come from my heart are for Leonardo. I would rather die being myself than live being what they want me to be. May God forgive me, but men will never forgive me. Why have you never shown this to anyone? Because back then it wouldn't have been any use. They would have said that it was the devil who wrote it, that it was further proof of the boy's perdition. Donna Judite held Clara's hand. But now, so it's different. Now there are people willing to hear the truth. Clara's fourth letter was the most courageous of all. In it, she told about her pregnancy, about the uncertainty of not knowing whether the child was the result of love or violence, but she made it clear that she would love the child regardless of the circumstances of its conception. Mary, the mother of Jesus, also had a pregnancy that caused scandal. She was also judged by those who did not understand God's plans. She did not know how to explain to Joseph that she was innocent, just as today there is a woman in our city who is carrying a child and does not know if it is the fruit of violence or true love. But just like Mary, she chose life. She chose to love. She chose to trust in God even when men condemned her. This letter caused a clear division in the city. Younger women, especially those who had suffered some kind of violence or social pressure, began to identify with the stories. Older women, those who represented the conservative tradition, were outraged by what they considered blasphemy. Father Jose called a special meeting to discuss the campaign of lies that was being spread in the house of God. But his strategy backfired when several people began asking inconvenient questions. Why hadn't he defended Clara on her wedding day? Why had he never properly investigated Miguel Santos's death? Why was his reaction to the letters so disproportionate if they were just lies? It was during this meeting that Mario Fontes made his fatal mistake. Unnerved by the questions and innuendos, he stood up and shouted, "These letters are lies. Clara Remy is a lost woman who has seduced half the men in this city. I have proof." The silence that followed was deafening. Several people looked at each other, thinking the same thing. If Mario had evidence of Clara's behavior, why hadn't he presented it sooner? Why had he waited until the mysterious letters began to appear? Clara, who had been watching the meeting hidden behind a column, knew at that moment that the trap had worked. The enemies were beginning to reveal themselves, to make mistakes out of desperation. The war was far from over, but the first battle had been won. The siege closed in one February morning when Clara woke up to the smell of smoke. She ran to the window and saw that someone had set fire to the school's tool shed during the night. The flames had already been contained by firefighters, but the message was clear. She and Leo were being warned that the limits had been crossed. Leo arrived half an hour later, his face contorted with rage as he saw the damage. "This was criminal," he said, examining the charred remains. "I'm going to file a police report. I'm going to hire private security. I'm going to—" "Leo, stop." Clara grabbed his arm, feeling the baby move restlessly in her 6-month belly. "Can't you see this is exactly what they want? For you to spend your energy fighting ghosts while they organize for the final attack." As if her words were prophetic, a car stopped in front of the school, and a short, plump man got out wearing a black suit despite the morning heat. Clara recognized him immediately. Dr. Sebastião Menezes, lawyer for the diocese and one of the most powerful men in the region, Mrs. Clara Remy. He approached with an envelope in his hand. "I am the bearer of a summons from Bishop Dom Henrique. You must present yourself at the diocesan curia tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Clara took the envelope with trembling hands. A subpoena for what? To answer the charges of scandalous behavior, disturbing the peace and blasphemy against the Holy Church. The lawyer adjusted his glasses with a sadistic smile. If you fail to appear, you will be automatically excommunicated. And, if you appear and are found guilty, well, the result will be the same. Leo took a step forward, his voice dangerously low. What right do you have to bully a pregnant woman? With the right that moral authority gives us, Mr. Giordano. Authority that you do not possess, being how shall I put it, a man of questionable morals. The lawyer smiled even wider. Ah, yes. We know all about your past, about your predilections during your youth. Clara saw Leo's fists clench and quickly placed herself between the two men. Thank you for the summons, Dr. Sebastião. I'll be there tomorrow. After the lawyer had left, Clara and Leo sat on the school steps, both lost in dark thoughts. They're desperate, Clara said finally. The letters worked better than we expected. Now they want to silence me once and for all. I won't let you face this alone. Yes, you will, because if you go with me, they'll use it against both of us. Clara put her hand on her belly, feeling a slight contraction. Leo, I need to tell you something. I had a visit last night after you left. His expression hardened. Who? Mario. The word came out as a whisper. He showed up drunk, saying, I'd ruined his life, that no one would marry him anymore after the scandal. He said if I didn't stop writing letters and get out of town, he'd tell everyone the baby was his. That son of a bitch dared to threaten you. Leo stood up abruptly. Where is he? I'm going to... Leo! No! Clara stood up too, holding him by the arms. That's exactly what they want. For you to lose control, do something stupid, give them the excuse they need to destroy us once and for all. But her enemies were not going to wait until the next day. That same afternoon, Clara went into town to do some shopping and found a group of church women gathered in the square, all wearing black dresses as if they were at a wake. When they saw her, they began to pray the rosary loudly, dramatically, as if they were exorcising a demon. Our Lady, pray for us sinners, they chanted, looking directly at Claire. Deliver us from the evil and temptation that walks among us. Clara tried to ignore them and entered the bakery, but the women followed her, continuing their performative prayers. Other shopkeepers began to close their doors when they saw her approaching. Within 15 minutes, Clara found herself practically driven out of the city centre by a combination of open hostility and silent boycott. When she arrived home, she found a surprise. Donna Giudice was sitting on the porch, accompanied by 3 other older women that Clara didn't know well. Girl, the time has come, said Donna Judith, standing up with the help of her cane. These are Conceição, Miguel's mother, Donna Rosa, who was a midwife in this city for 40 years, and Teresina, sister of the late Father Antonio. Clara sat down heavily in a chair, exhausted from the confrontation in the city. What is the time for, Mrs. Judite? To tell the truth, the whole truth. Donna Conceição, a thin, grieving woman, stepped forward. My son did not die in an accident. He killed himself because he could no longer bear being tortured by those men who call themselves saints. I have seen 7 births in 40 years, where the real father was not the mother's husband, said Donna Rosa, with the authority of someone who has kept secrets all her life. Some of these children were conceived in love, others in violence, but all were loved by their mothers, regardless of the circumstances. Teresina, the oldest of the group, spoke with a trembling but firm voice. My brother Antonio told me on his deathbed that he had participated in terrible things in the name of the church. He said he had helped cover up abuse, persecute innocent people, and turn love into sin. He asked God and me for forgiveness, but he never had the courage to ask the victims for forgiveness. Why are you telling me this now? Clara asked, tears streaming down her face. Because tomorrow you will need witnesses, replied Mrs. Judith, and because some truths are too heavy to be carried alone. That night, Clara could barely sleep. The baby moved constantly, as if sensing her mother's tension. She got up several times to pace the house, rehearsing what she would say the next day, preparing herself for the confrontation that would define the rest of her life. Leo showed up at dawn, carrying a suitcase. "I've changed my mind," he said. "I'm not going to let you face this alone. Let's get out of this damn city right now." "No." Clara's answer was firm. "If we run now, they win. Miguel died running. You spent 20 years running. I refuse to teach my son that the only way out of injustice is to run. Clara, they can excommunicate you. They can destroy you completely. Then let them try." Clara approached Leo and held his hands. "Love of my life, tomorrow I will go into that curia and tell the truth, the whole truth, and if it costs me everything I have, at least I will sleep in peace knowing that I did not die in silence." The tea. Sun rose red on the horizon, as if the sky itself knew that this would be a day of blood. Clara dressed in black, not as a sign of mourning, but of struggle. It was time for the final confrontation. The diocesan curia of the valley was built of stone and occupied a large colonial mansion in the center of the city, its high walls and iron gates creating the atmosphere of a medieval fortress. Clara arrived promptly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, accompanied by Leo and the 4 women who had volunteered as witnesses. A small crowd gathered in the street, divided between onlookers, supporters, and detractors. Dom Henrique, a 60-year-old man with white hair and a stern expression, received her in a room lined with old books and golden crucifixes. Beside him, Father José and the lawyer Sebastián formed an improvised court. On the other side of the room, Mario sat in a chair, avoiding Clara's gaze. "Clara Remy," the bishop began, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "you are here to answer the grave charges against your character and conduct. Scandalous behavior, disturbing public order, blasphemy against the Holy Church. How do you plead?" Clara stood up slowly, one hand resting on her 7-month belly. "I plead not guilty to all false accusations, Dom Henrique, but I plead guilty to something you failed to mention, having finally found the courage to speak the truth." A murmur ran through the room. Father José shifted uneasily in his chair. "The truth?" The bishop raised an eyebrow. "And what truth would that be?" "The truth about what really happened on the eve of my wedding. The truth about the fake letters that were spread around the city. The truth about Miguel Santos's death." Clara looked directly at Father José. "The truth about how you use God's name to hide your own crimes." "That is a very serious accusation, my daughter," said Dom Enrique, but his voice had lost some of its authority. Clara turned to Mario. "Tell them what you did on the night of September 15th. Tell them how you came into my house drunk, how you forced yourself on me, how you said it was your right since we were going to be married the next day." Mario turned red, his hands shaking. That's a lie. She's making up stories to—" "What for, Mario?" "To humiliate me further, to destroy my own reputation." Clara took a step toward him. "You raped me and then accused me of cheating to hide what you had done. And when you found out I was pregnant, you were afraid the child would be yours and you would reveal the truth." "Enough." Father José stood up abruptly. "We will not allow this woman to turn this hearing into a theatrical performance." "You're right, Father José. Let's talk about concrete facts." Clara took a folder with documents from her bag. "These are the letters that Miguel Santos wrote to Leonardo Giordano 20 years ago. Letters that you confiscated at the time and have kept to this day." Father José turned pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "And this is Miguel's diary, where he tells how he was psychologically tortured by you until he preferred death." Clara opened the notebook to a marked page. "Do you want me to read the part where he describes how you forced him to fast for days, to sleep on the cold floor, to flagellate himself as penance for loving another man?" "Where did you get that?" Father José's voice came out strangled. "From the hands of those who truly loved Miguel, from the people who kept the truth for 20 years, waiting for the day when someone would have the courage to tell it." Clara looked at Dona Conceição, who was in the front row of the audience. "Dona Conceição, do you want to tell Dom Henrique how you found his son the night he died?" Miguel's mother stood up with dignity, despite the pain that still showed on her face. "My son left a note, Dom Henrique, a note that the police hid from the family at the request of the local church. In it, Miguel explained that he would rather die than continue living in a prison disguised as a vocation." Dom Henrique looked alternately at Father Jose and Clara, clearly disturbed by the revelations. "If this is true—" "It's true," Clara opened another folder. "And these are samples of Father Jose's handwriting, compared with the anonymous letters that were spread around the city slandering me. An expert in graphology can confirm that they were written by the same person." The silence in the room was deafening. Father Jose was visibly sweating. Mario looked like he was about to vomit, and Lawyer Sebastião nervously leafed through his papers as if looking for a legal way out of the situation. "But I didn't come here just to defend myself," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "I came to talk about the future, about the child I carry in my womb that you want to brand as a bastard before it's even born." Clara placed both hands on her belly. "I do not know if this child was conceived in love or in violence. Perhaps I will never know, but I know that I will love her regardless of the circumstances of her conception, because a mother's love does not depend on ecclesiastical approval, does not need purity certificates, does not bow before human judgments. And if you excommunicate me for this, so be it. I would rather be expelled from a church that condemns love than be part of an institution that covers up violence." Clara looked directly at Dom Henrique. "Miguel Santos died because you turned love into a sin. I will not let you do the same to my son." Dom Henrique was silent for long minutes, clearly struggling with his own convictions. Finally, he stood up. "This hearing is adjourned. I need to evaluate everything that has been presented here today." But Clara wasn't finished. "Don Henrique, there's one last thing. Tomorrow night there's going to be a special performance at the Reformed School, a dramatic reading about love, forgiveness and redemption, based on real stories from this city. You're invited." When they left the Curia, a small crowd was waiting for them. To Clara's surprise, many people began to applaud. Women who had suffered domestic violence, young people who had been discriminated against because of their sexual orientation, families who had lost children to prejudice and intolerance. Donna Judita approached, leaning on her cane. "Girl, you did what none of us had the courage to do. You spoke for all of us." 3 months later, Clara gave birth to a baby girl with dark eyes and a sweet smile. They named her Esperanza. Miguel Giordano, hope for the future she represented. Miguel in honor of the young man who died fighting for the right to love. The school became a reality and became a reference center for humanized education. Clara took over as pedagogical director, while Leo took care of the administration. They got married in a simple ceremony in the schoolyard, under the mango tree where Miguel and Leo had met for the first time. Father Jose was transferred to another parish. Mario left the city after several women began telling similar stories about his behavior. Dom Henrique implemented a program to combat domestic violence in all parishes in the diocese. And every morning, when Clara woke up with Esperanza in her arms and Leo by her side, she whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for having been forgiven for sins she had never committed, but for having found the courage to forgive herself and to build a life based on true love, not on the approval of others. The stone city in the valley was never the same again, and Clara Remy, the woman who had been left at the altar, became a symbol that some people are born to break chains, not to wear them.